Hey guys, welcome to another Addicted Fishing video. Sitting out here, we're going to be talking about cut plug herring in depth because it's one of the most old school ways to catch salmon. But stay tuned, hopefully we can land this fish and we're going to talk about it. Until I tell you. Oh, it's a big keeper. Bruce, I'm gonna need some hands here. You got that net for me?
What do you want me to do?
I need a net. It's a big one, dude. Big keeper. You want one. It's helping. Just no.
Get the net right. Oh, just go.
Got a boy! Kill him with authority. All right, guys. Big springer, big keeper springer. Thanks, Bruce, for the net job.
Yeah, that's the best I could do.
Cut plug herring, one of the best salmon lures on earth. All right, guys, this happens to be a spring Chinook, but the cool thing about a cut plug herring is it works for summer, fall Chinook, and coho as well. It's one of the most versatile baits, and I don't think there's a salmon on the planet at some point in time in its life that could ever resist a cut plug herring. All right, guys, so doing a little early Columbia River trolling for spring Chinook today, but like I said before, spring, summer, fall, coho, any salmon, ocean, freshwater, in small tributaries, a cut plug herring is an absolutely deadly bait. But what I want to talk about first is one of the most important aspects of cut plug herring fishing, and that is making sure that you have good quality bait. So I have a frozen pack of Harbor Herring right here, and there's lots of good herring brands, but I really prefer using Harbor Herring. It seems like the bait's always fresh, it's put away right, and it's sized correctly. For those that don't know, these labels that you see here that are printed on the package indicates the size herring that you're going to be using. A green label is a 5 to 6 inch bait, and then you have red labels, orange labels, which are smaller, and then you have blue and purple labels, which are bigger. And depending on if you're halibut fishing or coho fishing, you may want to adjust the size of your bait, but looking at the label and seeing that this is a green, this is a really good sized bait for Columbia River springers, and so that's what we're doing today. So one thing I'm looking for when I'm picking out my herring is I want to make sure that it is somewhat fresh. Yes, it is frozen herring, but you guys can see here how the eyes look like a natural fish eyes. It's clear, there's no yellowing, and then there's iridescence to the scales. That blue, that pretty, it looks like a fresh bait. We got a fish, we got a fish. Get him, get him, get him, get him.
Net. Something.
Tip down, you're still got me. Give me a slow, tip down. Slow, steady lip. Slow, steady lip. Got him. Good job, keeper. Pull him back. Line out. Good job, dude. Man, we're trying to film you guys a tutorial and the springers keep biting. I don't know what to do. Good job, buddy. All right, so my son, while we're out here filming the tutorials, bonked a nice springer, but see how that fish is really iridescent? It's got that nice blue shine to it. That's what you want your herring to look like too. Because if it has that iridescent shine to it, it's gonna be a fresh bait and it's gonna catch you guys some salmon. All right, guys, we're back to the top of the troll now. We got that fish put away, but I've got my herring, and these were stored in a freezer in an extremely cold spot. What I'm doing is I'm making sure that when I'm storing my herring that it's not in spots that it could maybe even slightly defrost or have any kind of chance of getting warm when I'm transporting it or when I'm storing it like in my kitchen freezer or in my freezer in the garage. These herring need to stay completely cold because they're vacuum sealed in packages, and the second that they start defrosting, it starts drawing the blood out of the bait. So this morning, when I took it out of my chest freezer, I poked a couple little holes in it so as this bait defrosted, the blood wouldn't get sucked out and it wouldn't stain the bait. And now I'm to the point where these have slightly defrosted and I can take them out and start my brining process. So one of the most important things you guys need to do to your herring when you're preparing for cut bug fishing is to brine the bait. Yes, you can take them right out of the package, you can cut your angle into it, put it on your hooks and go fishing, but brining the bait adds a couple features that you want, especially in a fishery where there's not a lot of salmon hanging around and you're fishing a long period of time with the individual baits. Brining will toughen the bait up as a whole. It kind of dehydrates the bait, makes the meat a little more firm so it stays on the hooks longer. And what it also does is it also dries out the scales a little bit to where the scales will stick on the fish, allowing your bait to have more flash for a longer period of time down there. More flash is going to call in the fish a little bit further and get you guys more bites. And lastly guys, brining helps add scent to your bait. If you use the ProCure Brine and Bite, it adds some of the monster bite, which is those bite stimulants, those amino acids that can trigger fish to sometimes lash out at your bait where they otherwise wouldn't. So brining is super important for durability, keeping those scales and keeping the flash, and adding a little bit of extra something to make those salmon eat it. So now that I'm preparing my brine, I'm going to use the ProCure Brine and Bite today. They make this in a powder and a liquid form, but I'm going to show you guys the powdered form because honestly the liquid form is very easy. You just dump it in the quart jar, throw your bait in there, and it's good to go. But the powders are not a little more tricky, but you get a little more volume of brine out of buying one of these containers versus the liquid. So we're going to stick with the powder today. This makes up to 2 quarts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add half of this container into my quart jar here. And it's not an exact science, but you want to have quite a bit in there. Get all the salts and the bite stimulants. And now I'm going to fill this with water. Alright guys, I filled that with river water, and one thing I'm just going to say is you can use river water, you can use distilled water, bottled water, maybe even water from your refrigeration, but you definitely want to make sure that you use like a natural water. You want to make sure there's no chlorine, some weird scent from like maybe a city water somewhere. You want to make sure you can use the most natural water that you can get for your brines because you don't want to be adding that chlorine scent to your herring. Mix it up good. Okay, now that I've got my brine shaken and ready to go, I'm not just going to add fully frozen herring to the brine because by removing these herring from the package, if it was still to be fully frozen, the scales and some of the tails would stick to the plastic, would stick to the styrofoam, and the baits would stick to each other. And so what I've done is when I took it out of the freezer, I poked a couple holes in it like I was explaining before with the vacuum sealing to get rid of that. And I've let these just kind of slowly defrost just to the point where they're getting kind of loose in the packaging and they're not going to stick to the plastic. I want to retain all those scales, all those flash. I want to make, the perfect bait that I can. And so I've let those kind of defrost slightly, and now I'm going to open this up and then I'm going to add to my mason jar and I'm going to put those herring head down into the brine. These are still just barely frozen, but I'm on the river today and I just got to do this as quick as I can. But these are actually okay because see how the tails aren't like sticking and being pulled to them? All right, I'm gonna put my herring in there. For green labels, I need to add, I do about 1 quart per package of green labels in a quart jar. Red labels, I can get about a pack and a half, but I've got some nice healthy green labels in there. They're not like pushing and rubbing against each other, and they're going to be protected in a hard container. Real important, like I said, I don't want these baits sloshing around as the boat wakes are coming by, because as it's doing that, they're rubbing against each other. They're just going to remove all their scales. So I want to make sure to keep them head up. And now I'm going to let those brine for anywhere between a few hours or a couple days before I fish them. So when it comes to adding color to my brine, I'm going to do it at the start of the process. I just got done mixing up this batch of brine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do some fluorescent lime chartreuse from ProCure. This is their badass bait dye. It's the powder. And I'm going to add about a teaspoon to this. But for a tip for you guys, if you want to make really bright, vibrant chartreuse herring, you need to add a little bit of baking soda to this as well. You don't want to use a lot of this stuff, because if you use a lot of it, it's going to stain everything, and it's going to be crazy, crazy yellow. And this stuff is very potent and very powerful. But if you add just a little bit of baking soda to the yellow brine, what happens is that baking soda kind of absorbs into the herring itself, and it allows that yellow-green brine to take to the herring a lot better. If you're going to use the blue Badass bait dye, you don't need to do it. It's very potent. If you use the pinks and oranges, you kind of don't want to do it either, but adding a little bit of baking soda to your chartreuse dyes will make your herring absolutely glow. And I'm not going to use them all. We're going to put a few in there. Add them up. And we're going to let those soak overnight. Let go. No! You let go. So I've got some brine herring here, and now we're going to talk about the business end of the deal. How you go about actually making the cut in your cut plug. Start with a couple baits here, because I want to show you guys a couple different examples of spins that you can achieve. What I'm going to start with today is just a double hooked fixed rig. And so for a green label herring, I like to do a 4-finger gap between the bottom of the top hook and the top of the bottom hook. This is on some 30-pound test line, but you're going to adjust that pound test to whatever fishery you're going to be participating in, whether it's fall fish, spring chinook. Sometimes springs are a lot smaller than fall fish, so you need bigger pound test. But what I will say is always try to use the lightest you can get away with. Having a lot of material on that leader is going to cause the bait to spin less or less easily. So making sure you use the lightest leader that you can achieve while still being productive with your fishing. In other words, you're not going to break off or miss a couple fish because you're trying to be light on the hook sets and all that good stuff. So making sure you got a light leader. We've got some Addictive Salmon Advantage hooks. These hooks are not available probably at the time of this making, but something we've been testing for a couple years. TX coated, very sharp, rounded, a little bit flatter eye. And what that does is it allows the hook to sit a little bit better on the line to where it's going to grab more of the meat in the fish when the fish decides to finally bite it. Well, more on that in a little bit. But fixed hook setup, 2 hooks, let's get to cutting. One big component to making a good cut plug is your knife. And what I like to recommend is using a long, thin knife, because you don't want to ever have a moment where you're sawing back and forth, and the shorter little bait knives that you get, sometimes you have to sit there and keep pressing and keep sawing. You want to kind of avoid all that sawing action. You want to be able to go through the bait in one clean cut, because the bellies, even after brining, can still be kind of delicate, and you want to do as little damage to that bait as possible so it fishes longer and fishes more efficiently. So let me show you guys what I'm talking about. All right guys, so just to help with making a consistent bait, and if you're new to cut plug fishing, it's always important to use one of these ProCure plug cutting boxes. You get different spins by different angles that your knife slices through the bait, and I'll show you guys a few of those in a minute. But how I'm going to do this is I'm going to take my bait, put it in the box, and I'm going to do it with a large cut. I'm going to line it up to where the knife is going to go just in behind the gill, and not try to hit any of that, because there's a hard bone that protects the gill. I want to be into the meat behind it. But I'm going to try to use the full length of the knife when I slice it through. So I'm going to line it up, run it back, and I'm just going to slice through in one good motion. See how I separated that head in one motion? And the bait is really, really cleanly cut. There's no jagged edges or torn edges in that bait. That is exactly what you're looking for. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of blood, but that's okay. That fresh blood, that stuff in the water, I think it makes your bait all that much better. And now you guys have the option of removing the guts or leaving them in. And honestly, it's kind of a personal preference. Some guys like to leave the guts in. It adds a lot of scent. It adds a lot of, other color, and it probably puts more blood in the water. Personally, I like to remove mine. That's just me. But you can also remove the tail and add a vent in the anal opening right here. And all you have to do is take your knife and open this up. And what that allows is water pressure to go into the body cavity and to come out the back to where it's not going to blow out this part of your bait. This is the weakest part of your bait right here. And so you always are trying to do whatever you can, whether it's a clean cut, brining it, adding a vent. You're trying to protect this from basically opening up anymore and ruining your bait. I'm going to remove the guts, and how I like to do that is to set the bait down, put very gentle pressure to where some of it sticks out, using my knife blade, being careful not to touch any of the meat. Just grab the guts and slide them out. If this is a properly made bait, what they actually do to these herring is they starve them for a couple weeks before they kill them and package them and put them in there. So there shouldn't be a lot of guts and material in there. And what that does is it firms up the bait, makes the belly cavity really firm. And honestly, it's a bait that's gonna last a long time and catch a lot more fish. All right, guys, and now just for reference, I'm gonna do the longer cut here, just so we can show you the difference in spins that you're trying to do. Very sharp, very clean angle, no tearing. I'll remove the guts. And you can already see just from these two baits the difference in angle that you're going to get out of these. So we're going to start with the spin that I prefer. So I'm going to use the more flatter cut. And I'm just going to take my 3/0 addicted advantage hook, add it into the belly cavity, and have it pop out the side, being very careful not to make any big holes or to remove as few scales as I can when I do that. That's going to lay this hook up against the bait. It's going to keep it there to where when the fish comes at the bait, he's hopefully going to get both hooks. And then I'm going to take that top hook, which is a 5/0, and I'm going to add it. I'm not going to go straight through the backbone. You can't really get through the whole backbone, because what's going to do is going to damage the bait. So I go just to one side or the other. I like to move the hook to the long side and go straight up, just alongside the backbone. And I'm also not going way into the fish. I'm just trying to get enough meat to where it's not going to fall off the hook, and it's going to add a pivot point that's more forward of the bait than this hook being back here. Because if this hook moves back further into the bait, it makes the bait roll differently. So this, to me right here, I've got good length on this hook. It's hanging back. I've got this hook up front. The point's nice and out. I've used a little larger hook. This happens to be a 5/0. And what I'm doing there is I'm just using a larger hook, so when a fish grabs, it has more chance at grabbing the point instead of the meat of the bait. And what I've got here is a beautiful cut plug herring. Let's see it roll. Alrighty guys, so I'm just delicately putting the bait in the water. There's a little bit of a tail flip in there, but I could probably remove the tail piece and get a little tighter roll. But right there, there's not too many salmon that are going to resist that. All right, now I'm going to use that cut that had the more angle to it. I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to add the hook through the belly of the short side, bring it out, trying to damage the least amount as I can. We're going to go to the long side of the backbone as thin as I can. Pull that out like that. Let's see how this one rolls. So it's got a little faster roll, a little faster flip. And some might think that that's always the best thing to have, is a fast roll, but if you're fishing in real heavy current and real fast waters, what's going to happen is that front leading edge of the bait is eventually going to deteriorate and fold over, and your bait's not going to look as pretty after too long. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out how your cut plugs are going to perform in the type of water that you're going to be fishing and the size of the bait that you're going to be fishing. Because like I said, you put that heavy angle in real heavy water, trolling real fast, it's just eventually, no matter how well it's brined, it's eventually just going to deteriorate and blow out, and your bait's just not going to look very good. So then you're going to want to have the little flatter angle with a little tighter cut to make that thing spin like a drill bit. And you guys, one thing when it comes to cut plug herring is you want to make sure that whatever cut you're doing, you're always kind of experimenting figure out where the best hook placement is for you. If you're a faster troller or a guy that likes to zip around, you're probably not going to want to have those steep angles. You're going to want to have those flatter angles on the bait. Your baits are going to last longer. But if you want to troll really, really slow, you're just dogging the bait along the bottom, having those little wider angles is going to allow that bait to spin a little faster in slower water. It's going to make it look a little better. You'll probably get more bites. What I'm trying to say is always pay attention to where you're placing your hooks, your spacing in your leaders, the leader material you're using, and the size of the hooks that you're using, because there's a reason why, like most salmon fishing, there's a reason why like 10% of the herring anglers catch 90% of the fish. Man, I'm hoping you guys can see the differences of the spin with the cup plug herring with the double hook rig. But we took off, it started to rain and the tide was over and fishing was kind of done for us for the day. But we got back to my garage and we're like, wait a second, we still have a lot to talk about. And one is being the triple hook rig. All right, so we used a lot of our herring, but I got some of those nuclear green herring that we did up earlier in the boat. And we're gonna use one of those as our test dummy here. But again, I'm gonna take my little cutting box. It's a nice big bait. I'm gonna go with the flatter cut just to make things easy today. One clean slice through. Hopefully that went all the way through. Oh, I might have just shorted it. One more little, there we go. Making sure no sawing action, no sawing action. Nice clean cut yet again. I'll even remove some guts for you guys. And we'll do a little vent. Give you guys the full meal deal. I don't know what that is. That's a wood shaving. Interesting. All right, got my cut plug cut. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this triple hook rig, and what I have is two 3/0 addicted advantage hooks, single point, and I got 2 finger space between these two, and they are fixed onto the line with an egg loop knot. Then I have a slider hook that I've used some 40-pound braid to tie in, and then this hook is able to adjust up and back. It's got a lot of tension on it, so it actually keeps the bait where it needs to be. But if I hook a fish, it might slide down to the bottom here, but it's not going to do anything too crazy to where I'm going to lose the fish. So slide rigs are real great when you're using anything from red label to blue label herring. You pretty much only have to tie that hook as a slide rig, 2 hook space here, and you'll be good to go for a triple rig on a cut plug. Now what I'm going to do is I've got the short side here and I've got the long side here. Short side, I can see a little more of the meat on the angle. And it's really important that I get this right, because I'm going to take this first fixed hook on top of the line here, and I'm going to go about 2/3 of the way back into the fish, and I'm going to stick the hook in and have it come out the same side, just evenly down the fish. Hopefully you guys can see that. And I'm going to just pin it in there. Now, to be honest with you, I got a little more angle like this. You want it ideally a little flatter, but this is what we're going with. You guys get the idea. Basically, that hook pins there. This back hook is just going to hang out. It's going to spin, and it's going to stay free of the fish, just like that. Then I'm going to take this 5/0, and just like my other baits, I'm going to go to the long side of the bait, up the side of the backbone, into the meat, and straight up and out, just like this. Now, if I have a little extra line here, I can use that slider and I can suck that up to make it a little tighter. But one thing I'm not going to want to do is I'm not going to want to have any extra kink in this line to where the bait is going to fold up, because if it folds to the inside like this, I'm not going to get the spin that I want. I want this to lay flat. I want the cut of the bait to do all that spinning for me. And this is a real great way to incorporate a 3rd hook into your rig. Again, just like before, you want to use lighter leaders, you want to use lighter hooks, because you want that bait to turn. You don't want to weigh it down with real heavy wire hooks because you'll start, compare them. Take them, do a bunch of experiments. Take some heavy hooks, take some heavy line, take some light hooks, take some light line, do the same cut, try to do the same hook placements and roll them in the water next to each other. And you'll notice that some of those other ones are not gonna have the spin, they're not gonna flip as easy. And so when you're doing that slow trolling, they're not gonna get the action that's gonna get the bites from the salmon. All right, so hopefully that showed you guys a little bit on how to actually make those cut plug spin with the hook spacing and the hook sizes. Give you guys some ideas and some pointers to look out. Like I said, experiment a lot. Try to figure out exactly what makes it spin for your trolling speed and how you guys wanna do. But here is a setup that I gotta show you guys on how to get that bait actually in front of a fish. So when it comes to rod selection, you don't want a very stiff rod. You want a soft but strong rod. Sometimes you're gonna be fishing anywhere between 2 and 20 ounces of lead, but you don't want a tip that when the fish comes up and grabs the bait and tries to pull on it, the tip is so stiff that the rod won't give to the fish to where he has a little bit of a chance to eat the bait or hopefully grab it and turn away without it getting immediately ripped out of his mouth. And that's even before the angler jumps up and grabs and sets the hook. That's the rod doing it. So what I use here is the Okuma 1062H's. The extra heavies, the XH's, do work very well, and I will use them on my bow rods occasionally, but I want to use the softer rods. So the H in the 15 to 30 is a great rod. The length, the 10.5 foot, is very parabolic. It's got a lot of shock absorption, but it also has a lot of give. So when the fish comes up and grabs the bait, he's got a lot of give. You can take the bait, hopefully get hooked and get stuck. Don't go out there with the broom poles, guys. You're going to be very frustrated fishing cut plugs. I have braided line because what I want to do is I don't want to have the stretch, and I want to be able to see what that rod tip's doing. If a fish grabs it and he's pulling away from it, people might think, oh, well, you're not getting a lot of stretch from that braided line, but my drag is going to take up the rest. So if a fish grabs one hard enough to where it pulls the rod down or wants to take line, my drag is going to be set a little bit loose than what we're probably more familiar with trolling, because again, I want that fish to be able to grab the bait, hold it into his mouth, swallow it, and hook himself. So for a basic triangle rig when trolling a cut plug herring, guys, I start with a colored bead just so I can identify where that's at. In the heat of the moment, it's just real easy for clients to identify how far they need to reel that up to the tip. Followed by a short bus slide lock sliding system. And what this does is any twist or anything that's generated from my triangle or my cut plug down below, if it actually runs through this bumper, what this does is it locks in over this last eye of the swivel and prevents any twist from going up the line. These are great for triangle fishing. They're also great for 360 fishing. It's got a little snap here that I attach a little swivel, and 14 to 18 inches, a 20-pound test line that I'm going to attach my lead to using a Brad's Duo Snap. And then I've got my braid tied to a 6-bead bead chain by Brad's. And the reason why I like using these instead of the little ball bearing swivels is because I've got 6 opportunities to eliminate the line twist from the line versus 1. And if I get grassed up or if I get weeded up and my one ball bearing swivel fails, it's going to generate a lot more twist. It's going to ball my gear up. It ain't going to fish very well. But using a 6-bead bead chain, I've got all these other opportunities to eliminate the line twist from all this spinning gear from screwing it up. And now attached to that 6-bead bead chain, I've got a bumper line here. And what I like to do with this is I like to run at least a 50-pound test. I don't need to be so sneaky with this line. In fact, there's some manufacturers out there, like Short Bus has the Short Bus Stiffies, that are actually made out of 200-pound test. The fish aren't too worried about this. I shouldn't be either. I do want this distance to be a little greater than my weight drop distance just to avoid tangling and avoid any hiccups down the road while I'm trolling it. But a heavy line here is good because if I snag this up, I'm always going to get my Short Bus flasher back versus potentially breaking this off and losing all my gear. So I want to run something heavier. I don't really care if it's any heavier than the braid because nothing on this part of the setup is going to tangle up or snag unless I were to wrap this triangle like around a piling or do something really bad. For the most part, 99% of the time, I'm gonna get all this stuff back. I'm just gonna break off my light leader. Then onto the triangle leader, I've got another 6-bead bead chain followed by a large Brad's Duo Snap. And then I've got my Short Bus flasher. This happens to be in the Chartreuse Hunter. Great color for spring Chinook on the Columbia River, but I guarantee you this thing is gonna do great for fall and summer Chinook too. It's a proven killer. But one thing cool about Short Bus is he's got a million different colors to utilize. He's got stuff from fluorescent orange like the Sweet Abbeys, Twisted Addictions in pink, chartreuse, green, chrome, UV, not my particular favorite, but And of course the full chrome dip, which you guys saw earlier, which is just a chrome flasher through and throughout. It reflects everything. Great flasher. You saw me using those this morning. Can't really say enough about them. They're awesome producer guys, and especially on the tough year we've been having, it's been getting it done. So got the chartreuse center here with another duo snap at the end, and then yet another 6-bead bead chain. You guys kind of get the idea. All that line twist, all that spinning gear to utilize these bead chains is just to help from all this wrapping up, getting too much twist and fouling while you're trolling. Sometimes you make long passes with cut plugs. I want them fishing the whole time. And last but not least, guys, I've got my leader where this is a double hook rig. We talked about that earlier. And I like to just utilize the 40-pound test Brad's Duo Locks because I can just attach them quick. I can undo leaders. I can hand them to clients. Nobody has to know how to tie a knot to attach this to a line. I'll put that on the back of the leader, or excuse me, on the back of the triangle. And just like that, I'm good to go. So at the end of the day, guys, hopefully you caught some fish on those cut plugs, but generally you're gonna have a little bit of leftover bait. So this was what we had remaining for today, and I'm not gonna go fishing for a couple days. Well, the last advantage that I forgot to tell you about earlier with a brine bait is that you can actually save it and store it, and it will fish just as good for the following days. I'm gonna take the bait out of the brine, and I'm gonna add it to a plastic bag. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the air out, I'm gonna roll it up. I got a really big plastic bag here, guys. I get it. Don't, oh, you're wasteful. It's okay, it's one of our fillet bags. That's what I got right now. And I'm gonna roll them flat. Hopefully I'm gonna have a few more in here. Hopefully I'm not, because they all got fed to salmon. And I'm gonna put this directly in the freezer. And what's gonna happen is the fish are gonna freeze, but because I've brined it, because I've stuck all those scales, I've firmed them up, and I've stuck them honestly better to the fish than what they were gonna be in their natural state. The scales aren't gonna like fall off or be removed when I defrost them later. What's great is that if you're a guy that fishes on the weekend and you wanna go the following weekend, take some leftover bait, throw it in a bag, throw it in the freezer, and then defrost that. And you don't necessarily maybe use it as your first run, but I know that Steve and some of the guys at ProCure, they will fish this bait first run through. They don't care. It makes no difference. The bait has been preserved, it's been protected, it's made durable, and it will continue to even fish weeks and weeks later. If you haven't caught one on a cut plug, hopefully those will get you guys pointed in the right direction. So that's enough about that. Be sure to like, subscribe, share this out there with all your family and friends. We appreciate you guys watching Addicted Fishing. We'll see you on the next one.